without outside assistance, and walking around the outside of the hole are a bunch of elephants. You don't know how many elephants. You just see the silhouettes of their trunks kind of moving over you, and you hear the thunderous sound of their massive footfalls on the edge of the pit. And meanwhile, underneath you, under your feet, you hear the rumble of burrowing creatures tunneling directly underneath you, and you hear the clack-clack of their mandibles as they hunger for your flesh. And as you stay trapped in this subterranean nightmare from which you will never escape alive, you find yourself thinking of a sitcom episode that you watched several years earlier. And the plot of that sitcom, which seemed banal and cliched and boring when you first watched it, now seems amazingly powerful and poignant and insightful and meaningful to you in particular, your life. And you realize that all those wacky sitcom misunderstandings represent things that you yourself have failed to understand, and that just as you are trapped in this hole in the ground, those people in the sitcom are trapped in their sitcom lives and their jobs and their suburban house with their giant couch and their indeterminate number of children, and their whole very personhood is being crushed down to a series of act breaks. And as you sit there in this hole in the ground, and the light overhead gets dimmer, and the setting sun is occluded by the steep walls over your head, and you suddenly grasp a universal meaning of that sitcom episode, and you suddenly have this great sense of insight. And I want you to hold on to that feeling of understanding and insight and universality, and just keep it fresh in your mind, because that means that you are now ready to run for mayor of Stockton. Yeah! You have the insight, you have the will, you have the vision. Mayor of Stockton, yeah! Okay, but I have to break it to you. Only one of you can actually, you can't all be mayor of Stockton. Only one of you can actually make it in the end. They occasionally let two people be mayor of Stockton if one of them is really narcoleptic, but that's only happened a couple times. So this is going to be a tough process. There's going to be a lot of selection. There's going to be we're going to be breaking you down and weeding out the wheat from the goats, and just look at the people around you, because those people are your competition. They're going to be trying to crush you like you're going to be trying to crush them, okay? And, just try to keep that feeling in your mind of being trapped in a pit, except now you're trapped in a pit with a bunch of other people who all want to be mayor of Stockton. And, there's going to be a 12-part process of, breaking you down and childhood regression and naked underwater jogging, and we're just going to, fucking get to the core. Are you ready to get to the core?
Yeah!
Are you ready to excel?
Yeah!
Are you ready to reach inside the hole inside yourself and pull out greatness?
Yeah!
Because greatness is what Stockton demands.
Yeah!
Okay? When I say bring it, you say on. Bring it!
On!
Bring it!
On!
Okay, so now we're going to bring up the current mayor of Stockton, Mike Jung, who's going to tell us more about naked underwater jogging. He's got a lot of ideas about that. They involve water resistance and how to use it, make it work for you instead of against you. This is really serious. There's a swimming pool up the street. We're all going to be heading over there in a little while. You got to get in the mindset. Keep your head in the game, okay? Mike Jung, he's amazing. He has a new novel coming out next year called Geeks, Girls, and Superheroes? Yes. He was a counselor to a bunch of teen superheroes back in the day who were all kind of former sidekicks trying to move into being just regular kicks and dealing with peer pressure and drugs and sex and wacky teen superhero problems like secreting an infinite amount of hallucinogenic flop sweat and blah blah blah. And he was all about he had two strategies for counseling these troubled kids, because they all become junkies in the end. That's if you've read any of the comics. He had two strategies for dealing with these teen superheroes. One, tough love, a lot of tough love, breaking them down, and then breaking them down some more, and just tearing them apart, and then kind of maybe rebuilding them a little. And number two, petting zoos. He had this whole psychological theory that all these teenage superheroes wanted to go to a petting zoo and then be in a petting zoo. And he could make that happen for them. He had the connections. And he had, unfortunately, every program has its failures, and basically every single one of his kids wound up being a supervillain, and this was kind of sad. And they all wanted to kill him. They all like built these elaborate death traps that would like impale his head on a 10,000-foot high spike and all that kind of crap. And so he had to get a bodyguard, and his bodyguard was a guy from like another planet named Nate, I think. And he and Nate would just like hang out all the time, and you know, Nate would bring him along when he stopped crimes. And you know, one time he and Nate were like out fighting crime, and Nate was protecting Mike, and Mike was just watching Nate work. And there was this sentient tidal wave named Theodolphus or something that was trying to destroy a city, and the sentient tidal wave was kind of rapping, and they were rapping, and the light was hitting the sentient tidal wave in this like really iridescent, beautiful way. And Mike Jung realized that, you know, selflessness is at the key of real superheroism, and that he should track down these kids that he had failed to help, and he should talk to them and have some kind of catharsis with them and work with them and stuff. And so he tracked them down and said, what can I do to make this up to you? And they were all like, we want you to ghostwrite our memoir, because we're at the point now where we need to like actualize our platforms and start merchandising. And so he's like, okay, fine. So he ghostwrote like 20 or 30 supervillain memoirs, like super successful ones. The main problem was that a lot of these kids, you know, their actual lives were really boring. Adverb overload, like they just loved adverbs. That was pretty much every other word was an adverb. No concept of punctuation whatsoever. No concept of like sentences having like subjects and verbs and shit. And as he was like slogging through these books, he finally came to a realization that these kids didn't need tough love, they didn't need petting zoos, they didn't need any of that shit. What they needed was syntax. And if they were like the living superhero proof of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, because their failure to understand verbs meant that they had no sense of responsibility and action and being. And so he actually, instead of ghostwriting their memoirs, he finally settled down and just started teaching them writing. And he's now like, you know, a lot of his former students are now very, very successful writers. I'm not going to name any names, Daybreakers, but you know, a lot of them very, very successful writers, still go around, you know, stopping crime or committing crime, but mostly very successful. And he's also written this new book, which is going to make anybody who reads it superpowered. So that's awesome as well. Please welcome the amazing Mike Jung.